Good morning, Joann.
Good morning, Claire.
Thank you so much for being here with me on the Clarity Conversations.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Good, thank you. And so what I'm going to do for the audience is I'm going to introduce you a little bit, talk a little bit about you, and I'm going to spend some time here because we've worked together a long time and there's a lot that I want to say about you. And then we're going to go into some Q&A, and our topic today, as I mentioned, is listening and being an effective listener. And I know that in some ways you teach a lot about executive presence and effective communication and how to help people look like polished leaders. And the truth is, when you talk to most CEOs and successful C-suite people, they will tell you universally that being a good listener is probably the most important skill you can have. Right?
I would agree, yes.
Okay, good. So let me talk a little bit about you. Even though you don't look it, you've been doing this for 30 years. What I've noticed about working with you is not only your poise, but that you have this curriculum where the material is layered in so powerfully that it builds. And I've just watched so many, literally hundreds at this point, of students be transformed in the work that you do and that we've done together. So quickly, you are 30 years you've been doing this. You work all over the world where people ask you to come and teach them about corporate communication and public speaking, notably at the King Khalid Foundation in Saudi Arabia, also at the Bogota Universidad Extranjero.
That's it.
And all over the United States as well. You work extensively with the New York City Fire Department and Police Department, and you have for years, and I've enjoyed working with you in that capacity. And importantly, you work at the Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs. You also work at Dartmouth, at NYU, at University of North Carolina. And since 2014, you've earned, really, the privilege of being voted in the top 5 courses out of 200 graduate courses at the School of International and Public Affairs. So the top 2%. And you've won a teaching award, the last specific teaching award about your presentation, and a notable professor. And I've had the privilege of working with you on that course. I've been part of your dream team since 2009, and I have learned so much from you, not just about being an effective coach, but about how to come across as an entrepreneur, to be credible, to show confidence when I walk in to, meet with high-level people. So thank you for all of that.
Well, thank you.
So let's start with Joann. You are one of the best listeners I know, and this is also why I wanted to do this topic with you today. And it sounds like an obvious question, but why is listening so important?
Yes, it does sound like an obvious question, but it's not obvious to a lot of people. I think especially in the United States, when we think of effective communicating, we often think of presenting and speaking, and listening is the communication skill that is used more than any other communication skill. And it's the one where, from a selfish perspective, it's how you gather information you wouldn't otherwise have, because most information is not written down. It also is a credibility builder. People like to be listened to, and so when you are that safe home of a listener, you actually build your credibility and become a trusted recipient of information. In terms of other people, we know it's a respectful thing to do. We were taught that when we were knee-high, that it's respectful to listen. It is also a way that you can help somebody, so it is a generous thing to do, to listen to somebody. And then from a relationship perspective, what I say to students all the time is listening is relationship magic. If you want to build a relationship with somebody, listen to them. It is the magic pill for building a relationship. So listen non-judgmentally. And also, it is a way for diffusing tension. So it's actually very effective in that way as well for diffusing tension, and that makes it important in negotiations or in conflict resolution. So a lot of reasons why listening is an important skill.
Wow, and it's interesting. So you've said all those things. What becomes possible when someone is listening well?
Well, when you are a good listener, people want to talk to you. And so you become a safe home for them to have a conversation, to try out ideas, and to, develop trust. So you build relationships, and then you also become somebody, a trusted resource.
Yeah.
You're the person that, in other words, that people want to talk to, so they come to you, and lo and behold, you end up having a lot of information.
Yeah, good. And I'm thinking, when you said about talking versus listening, that, we live in a culture where we're expected to be, authoritative and talk a lot. I think that a lot about either new managers or even slightly more seasoned managers, but people feel so much pressure to be the kind of leader who knows everything and who can dictate down to their team in this very insightful way, when in fact the opposite is often true. You earn the right to lead by listening.
Yeah, and when I ask my students at the business school or at the School of International Public Affairs, what is the one quality or maybe the second quality that you would want most in a boss or in a leader? Always they say, that person listens to me. I feel I can go and speak to that person and feel comfortable sharing with them what I think, which may be imperfect. So as a good listener, you have to be open to the idea that sometimes people throw things out there that aren't necessarily going to be completely formed and presentational, but you have to make that process okay for them. I would say you are looking to empathetically enable the expression of another person. And that means you have to manage yourself, manage your reactions, and be and process your reactions in a way that allows the other person to feel comfortable and safe.
Yes, and that is so important, because I can think of myself, as you know, I'm a talker, times when I've been in my boss's office and I say something that comes out kind of wrong because it's still not formed, as you say, and nothing will sort of break my trust in my boss than to be criticized or have them have what I say and run with it in the wrong direction. I just need them to take a moment, slow down, and let me blah for a second before, right?
Well, there are a lot of things that we may say in regular conversation, like as a process of conversation and bantering, that are fine in a regular conversation. But when you recognize that you're in an opportunity for active listening, then this is a time to suspend those reflexive responses. And criticism may be one of them. So it could be done in a very playful way. You may say something and someone might say, "Oh my God, you're such an idiot. You always do stuff like that," which in a conversation may feel bonding. But in an active listening scenario, it would close the door, so that the person who's speaking may feel like, well, now it's not safe for me to continue because I've been criticized and I'm feeling vulnerable anyway, so I'm not going to say anything more. Yes. And that's one of the challenges with effective listening, is to recognize when you've moved from what I would call a regular conversation into an active listening scenario, which means that you need to be able to suspend those reflexive responses.
Yes. So two things you've said that I'm already super curious about, or I want to talk more. One is the, I know about the door closers, so we're going to go there in a minute. How do you shift when you know that you're ready to shift to an active listening situation? What should you do to make that be appropriate?
Right. So when you know you're going to shift, and this is a very curious thing, because it takes a lot of sensitivity. It takes a lot of getting into, I'll say, the pace or the mindset of the other person. You have to be a sensitive person to recognize that now is an opportunity for active listening. So that's one thing. Be sensitive and be mindful of the other person's pacing and the way they express themselves. A really good way to transition into that from the perspective of the listener is to ask an open-ended question. And an open-ended question, as many people know, is one that allows the other person to share information in the order in which they want to and in the way they want to. It's not narrowed by barriers, by constricting barriers. So an open question could be, "Tell me more about that. How did that make you feel?" That would be an example of an open question. Or, "What was that like?" Or you could even just make a statement that could be neutral, such as, that sounds like that was difficult, or "What was that like for you?" And that means that you're opening the door for the other person to begin to speak. So in that way, you've shifted for yourself, maybe how you're going to now interact, and the other person has the opportunity to do that too.
Great. And then that takes me right into the next piece, which is after an open-ended question, somebody will begin to talk, share an idea, express an idea, whatever it is, or a thought. And then it's so important to what I call let them continue to hold the talking stick.
Mm-hmm.
You don't take what they say and run with it,
Mm-hmm.
but so how do you do that?
Right. Well, the first thing here is I would say that ideally you get a sense of what your typical door closers are. Now, door closers, again, are part of conversational banter. We all do some of them. And once you know what your typical door closers are, then you need the self-awareness and self-control to suspend them. So you stop them from just coming out of your mouth. And you just highlighted a very common door closer, and that is to divert to your own story. So if someone begins to tell you,
by the way.
So divert to your own story is where you hook on what someone has said and you segue, such as that makes me think of, yeah, oh, that makes me think of what happened to me, or that must have made you feel bad, but my cousin's story is so much worse, let me tell you that. So you hijack control and bridge to your own story. And again, that can be a lovely thing to do. It's meant to be maybe entertaining or supportive or to expand the conversation. But in an active listening scenario, that's exactly the thing that will shut down the active listening, because suddenly you, as the supposed listener, are now the speaker. And now the other person has to listen.
Yes.
So that would be an example of self-awareness for a typical door closer, self-awareness to know what you typically do in a conversation, and the self-control to manage that so that you're able to stop it when you think, okay, this isn't a regular conversation anymore. This is an active listening moment.
Yes. And one thing that comes to mind, you talked about a couple of examples. In a corporate setting, an example happens all the time where the boss, they know that they're expected to meet a deadline. They don't have the patience or the time to, deal with a team that is resisting. And so they might ask someone to express themselves. And then when the person does, they might say something like a door closer, like, well, that's all well and good, but we have to meet this deadline. So too bad. And, I can feel both sides of that. My stomach clenches if somebody says, sorry, but my way or the highway. But you can also feel the frustration of the manager or leader who's sitting there going, oh, I can't listen anymore. We have to move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, meeting management, of course, creates its own set of challenges for listening, because as somebody who's holding a meeting, you're not only looking to encourage participation, which means that you listen and you encourage other people to listen when someone is speaking, but you also have to facilitate the movement of the meeting. And so it's a delicate balancing act when you are a facilitator for a meeting. You're listening, but you're also looking for closure and movement.
Yes. Can you talk about that a little bit? The closure and movement. How do people, when someone talks too much and you can tell they're just not getting anywhere, how do you make them close and move forward?
Right. Well, first off, I would say that if you're going to be listening to someone, people like to be listened to. It's a great, when you speak and you speak from your heart, then a lot of endorphins flow. It's a feel-good scenario. So that means that the listener who enables that expression is is giving a gift of like endorphins to the speaker. And then the listener is facilitating that person's awareness because they get to speak. Now, in a meeting, you're looking to maybe close up some of that expression. And a good way to do that is to first honor the person who's speaking by giving them full attention for a length of time. And it may be an agreed upon length of time, or it may be a feeling length of time. And then you need to, so that other person feels heard and acknowledged, you need to paraphrase effectively. Paraphrasing effectively is the signal that you heard what that person was saying, and you are amplifying it through a recap so that it is acknowledged. Maybe it's included in the minutes or any kind of scribing that's taking place, and that other people recognize that's what, that's what the essence of this person's statement was. And now we're ready to transition to something else.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, because one of the things I hear again and again from my clients is at some point I have to cut it off because it just becomes a bee fest.
Yes.
Right? And so they get so afraid of, if I acknowledge and I paraphrase what the person said, you're never going to stop. And what they don't realize is that it's counterintuitive, but the opposite is true. When you acknowledge and repeat and let the person know that you've understood, not just I hear you, but actually say what they said, then they relax.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And a good paraphrase may begin with a statement such as, it sounds like you, or it seems to me that, what I hear you saying is, or if you're paraphrasing in a meeting and to a group, then it may be, John has just shared with us some of his important perspectives on X, Y, and Z. And thank you for that, John. Now we're ready to move on to, so you can acknowledge and then transition.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow. Okay. I said that listening wasn't a sexy topic, but it's like amazing how much you have to say. All right. So we've talked about the key principles, sort of, right? The common mistakes you see people make, and what might that be costing them at work?
Well, many common mistakes, but one of them is that I think people feel as though they aren't in power unless they're speaking. So that's one thing, is that there's an enormous amount of power that comes through listening. And I've known many executives, I'm not going to name names, but these are people that you would have heard of, people who have very powerful positions who control a conversation by intense listening. And intense listening is exhibited through really focused nonverbals that, indicate powerful listening. So there's a lot of power and influence that comes through being the focal point for speakers. And I can say, from my own perspective, Claire, many, many times I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this yourself because you're also a great listener, that you'll be in a group and whoever's speaking seems to be talking just to you. And the reason that is the case is because you give such a reinforcing response in your listening through the nonverbals and reactions. And so people want to talk to you. And what does that mean? That means that you actually are kind of helping them to speak, and you're the person they want to speak to. So there's a lot of influence and power in that.
And then everybody starts to turn towards you because that person is looking at you. Wow.
Yeah, so, the signals of effective listening that get you there are the nonverbals, which are, the classic nonverbals of listening, but a lot of people don't have any awareness whether or not they do these things and how important they are, but they're tremendously important. But that is making good eye contact with the speaker. And that is, what you're doing right now is you're nodding, smiling, those are very reinforcing nonverbals. Squaring off and facing the person who's speaking, maybe leaning forward a little bit to indicate interest, not fidgeting with, a pen, or God forbid, you're texting or typing while you're listening. That is completely impossible and the wrong signal to send, or doing anything else that may be perceived as a diversion of attention. The reinforcing acknowledgments, like the nodding and smiling, it may be little, nonverbal vocalizations like, or really, oh, wow, that say to the other person, I get it, I'm with you, I hear you. And then finally, little summaries such as paraphrases that we've already spoken about, but it could be just as simple as, wow, or that sounds like it was so hard. And that says to the other person, I heard you, I get it, I am listening to you, and suddenly you've developed an enormous amount of trust between you and that person.
Great. So this has not been hard, and you make it seem so easy. I know that it's not always easy, and we're going to sort of end now because I'm conscious of time, and I want to thank you for having been here. But one of the things that happens again and again with the students in your class when I'm coaching them privately is that I'll point out, do you see how Professor Baney stands this way, or does this, or waits in front of the room silently for you all to settle down, and that commands attention? And they say, wow, I never really noticed. And I said, no, you don't notice because she's so good at it that it comes naturally. And I say that because I also hear there's so much in leadership today about authenticity, and people don't want to feel plastic or artificial. And yet, when you're playing at a high level, it's really important to have a high level of polish and to really know the tools of how to quiet an audience by just standing quietly in front of the room. So I just want to say that you do that. You do it so beautifully that everybody doesn't even notice it. And that's really, you make it look easy.
Well, thank you. You know, and to that point, Claire, one of the things I like to say to the students, which is so powerful, is that you can't not communicate, that you're always communicating. And it's not just when we're speaking that we're communicating, it's when we're listening and when we're waiting and when we're thinking, we're still communicating. And we may be communicating interest and attentiveness, or maybe communicating disinterest or distraction, but we can't not do it. And so what I like to shine a light on is that it's not just when you stand up and you're on stage that you're communicating, it's all the time. So that's a good awareness to have.
Great, great, great. Thank you. And I'm also going to mention, because, so I would love for everybody to bring you into their organization. You know, you do that, you go into companies and train public speaking and communication all the time. So I've put in the blog post that people can email you directly. And it's been so meaningful to me that I can't say enough how much I'd love for everyone to hire you. But you also have a book called The Guide to Interpersonal Communication. And do you have it there? Okay, good. So Guide to Interpersonal Communication, Joann Baney, B-A-N-E-Y. People can Google it and buy it on Amazon, and it gives you beautiful basics about active listening.
Thank you. Claire, I want to extend my thank you to you and also tell you that I have tremendous respect for you, and it's been an honor for me to work with you all these many years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, good.
Thank you.
We will see each other soon.
See you soon. Thank you. Bye.